Hey, it's B, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be baking for you a vegan and gluten-free red velvet cake, and we're going to be talking about the Manson family. I'm really excited about covering Charles Manson. I'm pretty sure he was one of the first little forays into true crime for me. And I always found Manson super interesting because he didn't technically kill anyone, but he was able to brainwash people into doing this stuff for him. So let's get started. So Charles Manson was born on November 12th, 1934 in Cincinnati, Ohio. His mom was a 16-year-old girl named Kathleen Manson, and she was 16, and she would go off for drinking benders with her brother and kind of just leave Manson with whoever would watch him, honestly. She actually ended up becoming convicted of robbery because her and her brother would go and steal shit to fund their benders, and he had to be put up for foster care. She was convicted in 1939 and then was released on parole in 1942. Manson often would describe the weeks that his mom first came back from prison as some of the best of his life. But even though Manson's mom went to jail for everything, she didn't learn. When they were living in West Virginia, she continued to go on benders, and they eventually moved to Indiana. Manson was only 13. He was a truant. He got in trouble for petty theft and ended up going to a Catholic school, like a reform school for troubled youth, and would run away, and actually run away once around Christmas time to be with his mother, who promptly returned him to the school. He did try to go straight for a while, would do deliveries, try to, be on the straight and narrow, but it wasn't enough money for him, and he decided that he was going to continue to commit petty theft in order to supplement his income. He was eventually caught after he tried to rob a grocery store and was sent to the Boys Town School in Omaha, Nebraska. Only 4 days after he was sent to Boys Town, he and another child by the name of Blackie Nelson acquired a gun, stole a car, went on a robbing spree, and they were eventually caught. He was then sent to the Indiana Boys School, where he experienced a fair amount of trauma. He was raped by the other boys in the school by the encouragement of staff and was beaten regularly. He actually tried to escape about 18 times, but was never successful. But in 1951, his most successful attempt yet was with 4 other boys, and they stole a car, they stole a gun, they did a bunch of armed robberies at grocery stores and gas stations on their way to California. They were caught, and he was sent to another reform school in Washington, D.C., where he was actually given an examination. Turns out, even though he was completely illiterate, he had a high IQ, well, above average IQ, I guess I should say, of 109, but he was diagnosed as aggressively antisocial. So by his release date back in 1967, Manson had spent over half of his 32 years alive in prisons or institutions. He actually didn't even want to leave prison. He asked if he could just stay, and they're like, that's not how this works. And honestly, if they had just let him, Jesus. Anyway, so he ended up moving to San Francisco in 1967, and he actually met a young graduate there by the name of Mary Brenner. He was making a living begging and playing guitar. They instantly were attracted to each other, and she had him move in with her. Eventually, he broke down her barriers and had 18 other women living with them. Soon, he had a whole group of followers, and they were called the Manson family. He told his followers that they were all reincarnations of the original Christians, and that he was Christ, and that the establishment was the man, and they were the Romans. So what he ended up doing was getting a school bus, and they took the school bus and hippied it out, and they traveled all over the West Coast up to Oregon and Washington, and then came back down and eventually settled in like the western parts of LA County near like Topanga Canyon and Malibu. So they were out in the country at the time. In 1968, Mary Brenner gave birth in a dilapidated house in Topanga Canyon to a boy by Manson by the name of Valentine Michael. Soon after that, they moved to the Spahn Ranch, which famously was featured in that movie Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. But they moved there. It used to be a set for like Western movies, but now they got most of their revenue like doing pony rides. And Manson had the female members of the group, had them sleep with the 8-year-old nearly blind owner and do chores around the place and keep up the revenue with the pony rides in exchange for living there for free. Actually, at the Spahn Ranch is where Manson eventually meets a Texas college dropout by the name of Charles Watson. They nicknamed him Tex. And later that same year, they decided they were going to have another headquarters in Death Valley at these two dilapidated ranches called Myers and Barker. The owners there, thinking that the Manson family were nothing but like a group of musicians, were like, oh yeah, you guys can stay here for free as long as you fix up the place. It looks like shit. And they're like, yeah, sure, we can do that. So they hung out there. So splitting his group between Spahn Ranch and between Myers and Barker, Manson went back to Spahn Ranch and met up with a friend who showed him the Beatles' White Album that came out that year. And him and Tex listened to it, and Manson reports to have just been totally moved. The album like just touched his soul. He had been saying for a while to his group that he was convinced that a impending race war was upon them, especially since he thought he saw lots of tensions between white people and black folks. And he thought that the White Album was in code telling them that the time of Helter Skelter was nigh. So he wanted to create an album with the family that would also in code begin the chaos of the race war, so that what they could go ahead and do is wait out the race war in a... He thought there was a city under Death Valley that, like, even though there's no record of it existed, whatever. And he thought that they could all wait it out there. He called it the bottomless pit. Didn't know where it was. He just assumed it existed. That's fine. So yeah. So that's where things kind of began. And Manson wanted to see if he could create this album with this producer that he knew by the name of Melcher. And he visited 10050 Cielo Drive to try and find him, because that was the last address that he knew that Melcher lived at. Well, when he showed up there, he found that people he didn't recognize were there, and they all turned him away. They said, hey, we don't know who this is. This is the Polanski house. You need to leave. So he left and came back to the ranch, and to try to get more money to go ahead and make this album, he had a few of his members go and meet up with this man by the name of Hinman. Gary Allen Hinman was someone that the family had hung out with before, and he was a PhD for music. And Charles Manson had it in his head that Gary Allen Hinman had all this money, and he sent 3 people. He sent Bobby Beausoleil, Mary Brenner, and Susan Atkins to his house and held him hostage for 2 days, trying to convince him to become part of the family. Well, when he wasn't able to produce the money that they thought he had, and when he just didn't want to join the group at all, Manson showed up. He was pretty pissed off. He had a sword. What's with these cult leaders and swords? Honestly. Anyway, he had a sword, sliced this guy's ear, and it's like, I don't want to fucking deal with this anymore. And Bobby stabbed him to death. And they left. They wrote the word political piggy on the wall in his blood. And then a few days later, Bobby Beausoleil was caught by police driving around in this poor man's car with the murder weapon in the tire well. So after this murder and after Bobby's arrest, Manson was convinced Helter Skelter was here. It was time to go. They were going to instigate it. So then Manson sent Tex, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Susan Atkins, and I believe one other person, Linda Casablanc. I'm sorry, names are so hard. Names are so hard. Anyways, so he sent them all to 10050 Cielo Drive, where they killed the 5 people inside. Those 5 people were Sharon Tate and a few of her friends by the names of J.C. Ring, Abigail Folger, and Wojciech Rakowski, and then this poor dude, Stephen Parent, who was just there visiting the caretaker of the grounds. Susan Atkins then, in Sharon Tate's blood, wrote the word pig on the front door, and they left. The next night, which was August 9th, 1969, Manson was kind of pissed off about how things went down the night before. He didn't think it went that well. I mean, duh, but whatever. And so he went with the 4 people from the night before, with an added bonus of a Leslie Van Houten and a Stephen Grogan, and told them, hey, I'm coming with you because I'm going to show you how to do this. We're starting a race war, buddy. So they show up at the Los Feliz home of 2 local business owners, Lino and Rosemary LaBianca. Manson, with a gun, went into the home, woke up sleeping Lino, and took him into the living room where he had Tex tie his hands with like a leather, it says leather thong when I looked it up, just a piece of leather, tied his hands nice and tight. And then they brought in Rosemary into the living room, and Manson told them to put pillowcases over their head, and he wants them fucking dead by the time he comes back in here. He also gave Tex this special instruction that he wants all the women that were involved, like in the break-in, also involved in the murder. Tex was actually kind of frustrated by the weapons that he had available to him with the last murder. So he used a chrome-plated bayonet and just stabbed Lino in the neck. He was continuing to stab Lino when he heard some commotion in the other room, where the girls had taken Rosemary, and it turns out Rosemary had like a lamp and was like fighting these bitches off, man. And honestly, you gotta do what you gotta do in that situation. But Tex was able to subdue her, and he had the girls stab her repeatedly. It was found that she had 41 stab wounds total. Most of them were post-mortem. He went into the living room, stabbed Lino 12 more times, finished him off, and then Susan went to Lino, got a fork, stabbed him 14 times, left the fork in his abdomen, next to where Tex had actually carved the word war, and then she got a steak knife and just left it jutting out of his neck. They left. Manson actually wanted them to try and commit another murder that night, but Patricia Krenwinkel, she actually screwed things up by knocking on the wrong door, the wrong house, and freaked them out, and they left. And I forgot to mention, Susan Atkins at the scene of the LaBianca murder took Lino's blood, wrote the words "Rise" and "Death to Pigs" on the wall, and then wrote the words "Helter Skelter" on the fridge. So this was obviously a huge media sensation. People were freaking out about these mass murders, especially Sharon Tate was well loved, and she was 8.5 months pregnant. That's really bad. It's bad anyways, but like that just gives you like that extra pang of like, ugh. So police initially were investigating the Sharon Tate murders and the LaBianca murders completely separately. And the first little hint that kind of brought them to the family's door was, remember Bobby Beausoleil? His girlfriend was also a member of the family, and she was caught in relation to the Hinman murder, and she had talked about the family with police. Manson, during this time, was actually caught by police for something completely unrelated. They had been stealing cars and running through Death Valley trying to find this bottomless pit with group members. And the National Park Rangers and California Highway Patrol found his ass hiding in a fucking cupboard, and they took him into custody for stealing cars. Another hint was when investigators were investigating the LaBianca murders, they ran across this motorcycle gang, and they actually had been recruited by Manson to join his group, to join the family, but they declined. Ultimately, though, what brought everything into focus and solved this crime was that someone, like an old dorm mate of Susan Atkins, was like, yeah, they fucking did it. And everyone was brought into custody. They were all caught. Trial began on June 15th, 1970, and the prosecution rested their case on November 16th, 1970. Then on January 25th, 1971, the jury came back with a guilty verdict. And finally, on November 19th, 2017, Charles Manson died of a heart attack and complications from colon cancer. He was 83. And I hope that it hurt, that he was in pain, and that he suffered the entire time. Those last moments of life, I hope they were the worst thing he's ever experienced. But that was the Manson family. I have a very bloody looking cake right now. I'm going to go ahead and pop this in the oven. I'll make the frosting and the ganache separate, and I'll come back with a finished cake, and I'm very excited because I've never made a ganache before. So like, what could go wrong? I also like didn't do the egg replacer in the recipe and subbed for applesauce. So if it works out, I'll let you know. All right, I'll see you guys in a few seconds. So here's the finished product. doesn't look anything like the recipe picture. I honestly don't know what I did wrong. But it's okay. It's like got like a marbled effect, which like isn't the worst, honestly. And like it's cream cheese frosting and chocolate. You can't mess that up. It's good, baby. It's all good. So I'm gonna keep this intact because I want it to set up a little bit longer before I cut it. But I'm gonna insert a picture like I did last time, so you guys can enjoy a photo of the layers. But I think the cake baked just fine. There was a issue with it being a little mushy. I honestly think it's my oven, even though I bought an oven thermometer specifically to make sure, and like I did the whole toothpick test, whatever. It's neither here nor there, but the cake looks good. I tasted the batter. The batter tasted great. So I'm really excited to cut into this. I will insert a picture like I said, and until next time, make good choices, stay safe, and Donald Trump is no longer president! Okay. Have a good one. Bye!